With the movement ecology model, we're going to spend some time thinking about how different groups acting in social movements approach making change. As diverse groups of people with different lived experience, ideas, and skills, our movements are made up of organizations and groups and individuals that reflect that. We have different contributions to make to the broader struggle, from providing frontline services to campaigning against corporate interests to running soup kitchens and doing healing justice work. Understanding these different approaches in a bit more depth enables us to work together in a much more effective, sustainable, and intersectional way. One of the issues that NEON was set up to tackle is the isolated, siloed way that we as activists are kind of conditioned to work. As the INI Institute movement ecology model lets us know, as fish in water, we sometimes forget not only the culture that we're swimming in, but also the larger ecosystem that we're part of. Beyond our organizations, there are tons of movements and campaigns and cultures and communities that are trying to make change in their own ways. But the dominant culture of isolation and individualism can confuse us into thinking that we're actually alone in the center rather than integrally connected to a massive network of change makers with diverse theories of change. Ecological thinking or movement ecology shows us that diversity and mutual aid, rather than antagonism and conflict, are the conditions for strength and survival. If we see our work in this light, we're much better able to support each other and ultimately be more successful. The movement ecology is useful for not only appreciating different approaches to change, but also explicitly acknowledging our own individual biases towards a specific theory. Some of the most successful movements, like the civil rights movement or the Indian independence movement, were driven by a complex network of different groups and organizations, as you saw in the kind of early days of the course when you talked about the different stories of struggle. Movement builders and NEON as a whole believe that it's only when you have a healthy movement ecology that's nurtured and thriving across all three segments of the ecology that we can really start to drive change on an issue. We might think that it is possible to win with just one part of the ecology, but in fact, that is often just a kind of misconception about what's actually happening and an erasure of the work that's going on beneath the surface. And we want to kind of redress that imbalance through our understanding of movement building at NEON. So to dive into the model then, as we can see, there are three broad approaches to change that we look at within this model. We know that it's not that cut and dry. It's actually a Venn diagram and there's lots of overlap, but it's a useful way for kind of finding categories or buckets to think about the different approaches that exist. So the first one is personal empowerment. So this approach says that by empowering, developing, and healing individuals, we can move towards a more holistic and compassionate society that will in turn create the foundations for wider systemic change. So someone doing this work might say we need to start with the transformation of the individual ourselves, and from there we can change the world. So an example of this might be training, frontline services, leadership projects, things like that. The second approach is building alternatives. So this theory argues that alternative institutions and cultures create change by experimenting with alternative ways of being and doing in the world. And they're really good examples of what we can be and what we can do when we put our mind to it. And they might say we need to create new institutions as an alternative to the dominant institutions. And these new institutions should reflect our values and our vision and show people what's actually possible. So examples of this are time banks, workers' co-ops, communes, alternative currencies. Finally, we have changing dominant institutions. And this is the area of the pie that often is the most visible, the kind of tip of the iceberg section. So people doing this work believe that by changing dominant institutions, such as governments and corporations, they can change life more significantly and for more people than by any other means. So they might say the dominant institutions in society have the biggest impact on our day-to-day lives, so we should prioritize changing them in order to make the biggest impact. Examples of this are campaign groups, NGOs, charities, think tanks, things like that. So a couple of final points on the movement ecology module. Again, it's a Venn diagram. It's a lot more messy, but it is a really useful way for kind of categorizing the different people who might be out there in your movement space and thinking, okay, what's going on and what might be missing and what does that mean for what I should be doing? Realizing that there is in fact an ecology can be really freeing. It can liberate us from this idea that we have to do and be everything ourselves. You know, it can be a real relief when we actually kind of put down tools for a second and think, who else is around me? What are they doing? And how can I slot into a bigger struggle and think of myself as part of something bigger rather than as a kind of lone wolf trying to climb this huge mountain on my own. And ultimately, the critical thing is that we not only recognize the work that other people are doing and we witness it and we're conscious of it, but that we really appreciate it, that we understand by looking back at movements that have gone before, that we actually need people working effectively and sustainably and radically in all of these different sections of the movement ecology if we're going to build something that's capable of winning the scale of the change that we need. And that's where that core piece that we spoke about on the first day, movement appreciation, really comes into play here. It's not enough to just be aware of what's going on. You have to understand and kind of feel in a deep sense that the other people who are out there in movement space with you are offering something crucial, something that is really critical to getting you to where you want to be. And the movement ecology is a brilliant way to help you think in that way.